There is new doubt this morning in the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. A senior Australian Navy officer tells the Wall Street Journal that underwater pings detected 5 weeks ago may not have come from the plane's black boxes. Those signals were captured 3 days after another set of pings that investigators still believe came from the plane.
Many families of Flight 370 passengers have received no compensation from the airline, but CBS News travel editor Peter Greenberg says Malaysia Airlines has received $200 million in insurance money. Peter reports in the current edition of Fortune magazine that such a massive payout can be a windfall for a carrier. This morning, Malaysia Airlines told us that its insurance information is confidential. Peter Greenberg is here. Good morning.
Good morning, Charlie.
So how can they have a crash and they make money?
It happens all the time. In fact, it goes back to the days of the Titanic. This first came to light, at least for me, back in 1979. American Airlines Flight 191, the worst aviation disaster in U.S. history. Within 3 hours of that disaster, American Airlines received its largest profit in history because they bought the plane back in 1972. They had written it down in book value for 7 years. By the time of the crash, it was worth $26 million. That's the payout they got. And they actually described it later on as an involuntary conversion of an aircraft to shareholders, but it came in as a profit. And this goes on and on. Pan Am 103 in 1988, they received a payout of $9 million. Even the U.S. Air Miracle on the Hudson plane, a $22 million payoff within 72 hours of the loss of the plane.
In the case of Malaysian Flight 370, where we still really don't know what happened, how complicated will that be for the families? Well,
not complicated at all, which is the bad part of the story, because they're governed under what's called the Montreal Convention, which was established in 1999 to limit claims of only up to about $175,000, and that's only limited unless you can prove negligence. The problem here is there is no plane, there is no evidence, and there's no way to prove negligence, so this may be a situation where the insurance companies don't have to pay off at all.
Peter, what about the families?
Families have to wait a long time. You see, there's no provision in any state law in the United States for the awarding of prejudgment interest in wrongful death cases. So there's no real incentive for the insurance companies to settle. So historically, they never do it quickly. In 191 in Chicago, the families waited 6 and 7 years, and this goes on and on and on. In this situation, there have been some payments made to the families for basic housing and food and accommodations, but those aren't the settlement payments. That comes later.
There's no way to expedite the process for the families.
No, because there's no incentive for the insurance companies to do it. There's no law.
I mean, is there any way to create incentive?
Has to be legislated.
Okay, so there's the problem.
Yeah.
Could it be, it's terrible to say that the insurance companies could be hoping that we don't find out what caused this crash?
Well, remember, there's 3 kinds of insurance. There's hull insurance, which is the loss of the plane. They get paid off within 72 hours. That happened with the Titanic. It happened with the Costa Concordia.
Is that because of law?
That's the way the policies have always been written. Then there's liability insurance. That's wrongful death. But you have to be able to prove negligence to get a big payoff. In the United States, by the way, the average payoffs in these situations are between $3 and $5 million per case. In Malaysian Air, it could be $175,000, still spread out over a number of years. And then last but not least, there's war risk and terrorism insurance. And each insurance company covers that separately. Well, if there's no plane and there's no evidence, war risk and terrorism doesn't get paid off, and you can't litigate negligence because you can't prove anything.
And how do they decide how much families are paid? Does geography matter?
It matters a lot. In fact, this goes back to 1949. There was an Eastern Airlines DC-4 making a final approach into Washington National Airport where it was sliced in two by a Bolivian Airlines P-38. Interestingly enough, half the plane fell on the Potomac side, on Virginia side. Half the plane fell on the DC side. Virginia had a cap on how much you could collect. DC didn't. So it all depended on literally where you fell.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
And still no answer. That's what's so mind-boggling to me. Still no answer in this crash. Thank you, Peter Greenberg.